Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Thursday, November the 30th, 2023. I was looking at the news and I noticed that an American military plane had crashed off the Japanese island of Yakushima, and at least one person has been killed. So this plane was an Osprey, and apparently the thing about this plane is that it's got the function for vertical takeoff, so it's sort of half aeroplane, half helicopter as I understand it, but I don't really know much about planes and I don't know much about military planes. But I wanted to see if one could gain anything in terms of astrology about this accident. So I've got the chart, I think, of the accident. I think it happened at 2:47 p.m. On Wednesday. I don't know the exact spot, but I've got an approximate chart. Plus, I wanted to look at the chart of the test of the first flight. This plane which has had a lot of accidents. Had its first flight, a test flight, in March 1989, I think in Fort Worth. And so I've got an approximate chart for this first flight. And also I've got a chart for the new moon preceding this first flight. So those are a couple of things I want to look at today. But before I do all that, I want to look at the I Ching for today, which is Thursday, November the 30th, 2023. So let's see. Okay, so top right, that is a picture of the Osprey's first flight in 1989. It's still going. I wouldn't have said necessarily still going strong. It's a very controversial plane. I think it was brought in because there was that disaster when during the Iran hostage crisis. I don't know. I actually remember it. I'm that old, but the Americans were trying to rescue their hostages, and they sent in these helicopters into Iran. It was a complete disaster. It was a disaster for Jimmy Carter, who was president at the time, and that just wasn't the way to do it. So they were thinking about something else that could more effectively rescue hostages and go into that kind of situation where you can fly but also act as a helicopter. These helicopters with the hostage crisis, they didn't even crash because of enemy action. I think it was just a general disaster. Anyway, what I want to do, so I'm going to look at today's astrology. It's not particularly dramatic. You can see that the moon is still in Cancer. The moon is sort of making a sextile aspect to Uranus, beginning to make a square aspect to Venus. Okay, when you've got moon square Venus, moon opposition Venus, these kinds of aspects, between two female planets, it's kind of quite pleasant, but there's a certain danger of overindulgence, spending too much, eating too much, drinking too much, that kind of thing. Moon sextile Uranus, Moon Uranus squares are can be about sort of emotional explosions, but Moon sextile Uranus is more gentle. We can express a part of our feelings in a dramatic way, but not in a way that causes mass destruction. So I would have said that's quite a gentle influence. Also, Mercury, there's Mercury. It is semisextile Pluto. So the semisextile is a 30-degree aspect. It's somewhat tense. Mercury's in Sagittarius. It's got a lot to say still. Mercury in Sagittarius likes to say what's on its mind, even if what's on its mind is nonsense. So Mercury's got a lot to say for itself. But Pluto, there's a certain sense of reluctance there, perhaps fear. We're just afraid of the consequences, and we're worried perhaps that we're dealing with powerful people, perhaps people who are going to criticize us if we say the wrong thing. So a bit of self-consciousness may be creeping in with that Mercury semisextile Pluto. At the same time, Venus is quincunx Neptune, 150-degree aspect from Neptune. That can be problematic. I mean, I think in terms of relationships, we can get confused. We can get the signals wrong. In general, we have to be careful about our feelings. Venus in Libra is very sort of logical and likes to look at things on the surface and have nice conversations, pleasantries, that kind of thing. Neptune in Pisces, very different energy. Emotions flying all over the place. And so in terms of our various relationships, with whoever, not just romance, business, friendship, whatever, this Venus quincunx Neptune creates plenty of scope for getting very confused. Finally, I want to mention the fact that Jupiter is conjunct the Saturn-Hades midpoint. Now, Hades, hypothetical planet, but I do sometimes use it. So Jupiter is about benefit. And Saturn Hades is about things going wrong. It's about things going to ruin potentially. And there is actually a potential here to benefit from other people's mistakes, to benefit from other people making a mess of things. So, for example, I don't know, if you're a plumber and someone tries to fix their plumbing and they make a complete mess of it, that's great for you, isn't it? And you benefit from other people's mistakes. Or I suppose if you're a car repair person, you can benefit from people's accidents. So whatever we're doing, we can potentially benefit from other people, from other people's disasters. I don't feel guilty about it. I suppose that's the way it goes, isn't it? I mean, that's how. That's, I suppose, how a lot of people make their money. Okay, so now I want to look at the astrology in terms of the 12 signs of the zodiac. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Thursday, November the 30th, 2023. Aries. It's a day for reflection. You'll perhaps feel that you haven't been making the most of your abilities and that maybe you need to have a greater orientation towards the world at large. Indeed, you can make things better and not just for yourself. And perhaps surprisingly, there's something rather reassuring about your presence. Taurus, you know that things are stuck, not necessarily for yourself, but for the people around you, and you're in a position to get things moving again. Gentle persuasion might work, but with the moon making a sextile aspect to Uranus, you can be shocking, but in a way that doesn't cause any lasting harm. Gemini, don't mess up at the last moment. There is one area of your life where you have achieved quite a bit, at least in the short term, but it's easy to make mistakes. A loss of concentration could be very costly and spoil a lot of your good work. On a related note, something you do without preparation has big results, for better or for worse. Cancer. As you run towards the future, think about the past. Something happened perhaps long ago, which has direct relevance to the here and now. And just because it was painful or embarrassing doesn't mean that it wasn't a useful experience, which can inform the present and the future. A change of friends brings a change of fortune. Leo, there's something that you have been confused about for a long time. You've got some of the facts, but not all of the facts, and whatever surface appearances, you do feel confused. Things are now changing, though, and you're now seeing the precise areas where you might have been mistaken. You'll then have a chance to reconfigure some aspects of your private universe. Virgo. Mercury, your ruler, is exactly 30 degrees from Pluto. You can feel big movements around you, perhaps relating to society at large. And just because it's not personal doesn't mean that it's not important. Perhaps you understand what is going on in the collective, and you'll realize that sooner or later it will have an impact on you. Preparations can make all the difference. Libra. It's nice that Venus, your ruler, continues to move through your star sign. But that doesn't mean that there aren't any problems. And right now, Venus is making an 150-degree aspect to Neptune. Plans could be disrupted, careful organisation could be wrecked. It's important to not be flustered, to be disciplined, but also flexible. Scorpio, it's probably a good idea to be self-reliant. You don't need people around you, and certain individuals may be unreliable and perhaps even deceptive. But it won't be their fault. It's just how they respond to the current situation. But just because someone is unreliable doesn't mean that they're not interesting. Indeed, where there is unreliability, there can also be excitement. Sagittarius. Things aren't as simple as they seem, and where there's feelings, there's also complications. So it's important that you tread carefully and that you respect other people's sensitivities. Yet it is a good day for noticing things. One thing, another thing, and then the connections start to form. It then won't be long before you're in a position of knowledge. Capricorn. You don't have sufficient resources to achieve your short-term targets. You might think that other people can be helpful, but that's not quite enough. In fact, the issue might be knowledge. You know a lot, but in one crucial area there's missing information. But don't worry, it won't be long before you're able to fill the gap. Aquarius. There's stuff going on that doesn't make much sense. You try to work it out, but it's still very confusing. But it's not important, and you can let the thing run without interference or comment. And by not getting involved, you give yourself the opportunity to sort out administrative details in your own quiet way. Pisces. It's perhaps possible to have too much of a good thing. Performing the same activities, enjoying them in the same old way, having the same expectations. At a certain stage, you get bored. Or you perhaps become lazy, forgetting the fact that all the time the world is moving on. It's always important to stay relevant. Okay, so I now want to move to the I Ching. So, as always, I ask the question, what is Thursday going to be like for people watching this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram 17, which is following. This hexagram is, I suppose, about having respect for ourselves, and considering the possibility that we are someone who is worth following. We have got a lot to offer here, and when people really hear what we've got to say, they're going to be impressed. But it can take a bit of time to make our impression felt. And this is emphasized by the fact that the first line is moving. And with the first line moving, it suggests that to begin with, when we're trying to interact with people, we really can't really establish ourselves. We might be an expert on something, we might be an authority, but somehow we're not really being recognized as an authority. We're certainly not being recognized as being better from other people. And, I know we shouldn't be worried about whether or not we're being better than other people, having superior knowledge to other people. But we just perhaps need to accept that we need to be prepared to talk to lots of different people on an equal footing. We mustn't have ideas. I know we might feel that we should be in a position of leadership, but certainly to begin with, we need to be open-minded. We need to just accept that us and the people around us, we all have the same status, and we are going to be recognized on the basis of our worth. And this hexagram, this line, this bottom line, it's broken, so it breaks. So that means it moves, and it moves to hexagram 45, which is gathering together. And it's interesting that yesterday, when I did the I Ching, 45 was also the second hexagram. So that suggests that what's happening today is very much a continuation from yesterday. This is a time for getting together with other people. And then I think our leadership qualities can be recognized. But it may not be our leadership qualities. In certain situations, it could be someone else's leadership. Having a strong person for people to gather around is certainly important. It could be us, it could be someone else, and we just need to be able to understand the situation. It's not about egos, it's not about one person having lots of status or us having lots of status. It's all about what is good for the collective. And what is good for the collective is people to get together around a common cause. Okay, so that's the I Ching, and I now want to talk about this this plane crash. I don't know much about it. This plane, the Osprey. I mean, it kind of looks dangerous. I mean, I think that was a 1989 picture of its first test flight, where it only went in helicopter mode. But helicopters are dangerous, and this plane is notorious. I think it's in some respects regarded as a death trap. The crash itself, the latest crash, because I think it was actually a crash. I think it was a crash in one of these things a few months ago. This was the chart for the crash today. And I notice it says Tokyo, Japan. It wasn't Tokyo, Japan. The way this program works, at least as I understand this program, I have to put in somewhere in Japan because I need the Japanese time zone, and then I will adjust for longitude and latitude. So this is the chart. This is the chart of the crash. Now, what's kind of interesting, a little perhaps, a few days ago I talked about an accident that happened locally. There was Cancer on the midheaven, I think, and the midheaven was on the Mars-Saturn midpoint in that accident. Here in this chart, the midheaven is not quite on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, but you see, there's Mars, there's Saturn, but the midheaven is fairly close to the Mars-Saturn midpoint, but it's a couple of degrees off. I would regard that being a bit, that's too far to say that that's really on the midpoint. But the point about Mars-Saturn is that the Mars-Saturn square is only a couple of degrees apart. So it's separating but it's still pretty close. And Mars-Saturn is the death axis. Sorry, Mars-Saturn is the death pair. So when you've got the midheaven kind of on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, even if because it's a direct midpoint, it's a kind of midpoint you can see by eye, can't you? Saturn, Mars, midheaven down. This might have been an approximate time to be not to be flying in these things. So that's the first point. Second point, I suppose the moon is void, of course. It's just separated from the opposition of Mercury. Mercury in Sagittarius, not a great place for Mercury because it's fallen. And Mercury in Sagittarius, people can get very confused. Mercury is about the brain. It's about working out what we're supposed to be doing. And the moon is void, of course. I suppose you could say void, of course, it's going nowhere. The moon has made its last aspect before leaving the sign. It's void. It's just made an opposition aspect to Mercury. So having an accident with a void moon, not reaching your destination, I suppose that kind of fits, doesn't it? But I'm not making I'm not trying to make a big deal about that void moon. Normally, the moon is void a lot of the time, and people manage to avoid having accidents. So I wanted to look at the first flight. I don't know what time the first flight was. This was a test flight, and it was in helicopter mode. It was on March the 19th, 1989, I believe it was in Fort Worth, Texas. I think there's a test strip or whatever around there. So I just quickly wanted to look at that first flight. Was this a good time for a first flight? Notice that there's a Mars-Jupiter conjunction. There's Mars is in Gemini. Sorry, Mars and Jupiter are both in Gemini. Jupiter doesn't work very well there, so there's a certain hastiness there with Mars, Jupiter, and Gemini. Let's get this thing going, and Jupiter and Gemini. Gemini is two. You might actually work Mars, Jupiter, and Gemini. Gemini is. It's a sign that has two ways of being. So you could say Mars, Jupiter, and Gemini for a plane, but doesn't know whether it's an aeroplane or a helicopter. So maybe that kind of fits. Also, we have a Uranus-Neptune. We have a Saturn-Neptune conjunction at the time of this first flight. So that's that might be. That might be a bit difficult, but anyway, that's the chart. That is the chart. I don't know the time, but what I do know the time of is the previous lunation. So this is the new moon prior to the first flight, and I think this new moon is possibly a bit difficult. You can see that Mars is in Taurus, and it is making a sesquiquadrate aspect to the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. So that makes it more dangerous, more difficult. Plus, we have got Uranus pretty close to the descendant. So when you've got Uranus on a descendant, that could very well suggest accidents. So it's not great. Oh, we've also got Chiron We've got Chiron very close to the ascendant. Chiron opposition Uranus on the ascendant. So the hurt and the wound from accidents, you could say, with that lunation, with that new moon, before the test flight. Mars is fairly close to Algol. Algol is the head of the dragon. It's probably not exactly on Caput Algol. The head of, sorry, not the head of the dragon, the head of the demon. It's over. I think it's over a degree away, but it doesn't help. Mars is in a slightly difficult position there, in its detriment. As I said, sesquiquadrate the Saturn Neptune conjunction, and finally, I want to consider the test flight. There are probably a number of charts you can regard as the birth of the Osprey as a plane. So, is there any possibility that the birth of this plane is like a horoscope for the plane? And then what about the transits for when this latest accident happened? So here we have on the inner wheel we've got the first flight of the Osprey on March 19th, 1989. On the outer wheel, we've got the chart of this latest crash in Japan, and I do think there's some interesting stuff going on. Remember, there was a Mars-Jupiter conjunction at the time of this first flight. And so look at Saturn. Saturn at the time of the crash was at 103 Pisces. So Saturn was square Jupiter. Okay, that would have been happening for a few days. But then look at Mars. Mars was at 326 Sagittarius. So Mars was on the Mars-Jupiter midpoint. So Mars was really attacking the whole project when that plane went down in Japan on Wednesday, and likewise the Sun at 644 Sagittarius was opposition Mars. So this Sun-Mars conjunction at the moment was really triggering the Mars-Jupiter, the Jupiter-Mars conjunction at the time of the Osprey's first flight. And so this might have been a time when the Ospreys should have been grounded, perhaps. Of course, if these planes constantly get grounded on my advice, I suppose they never get anywhere, nothing would ever happen. And also, the Sun was at 29 Pisces at the time of this first flight, just before the 1989 spring equinox, and the Moon at the time of the accident was at 29 Gemini. So the Moon was exactly square the Sun, and this Moon Mercury opposition was square the Sun at the time of this flight. So overall, I think there were a couple of important aspects going on between the two charts, the chart of the first flight and the chart that the plane went down on Wednesday. So I think we may be seeing some astrology at work, and maybe when in future when they fly these things, they need to take greater consideration of the astrology of the thing. Because maybe it could save a few lives. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about Ospreys and aeroplanes. It's a subject that I don't really know very much about. But I hope you found that interesting, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.